Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another PBALC author live stream. This month, we are featuring all authors because it's National Literacy Month. So I hope you're joining us after the long Labor Day weekend because you don't want to miss out on any of these authors' interviews because they're spectacular. I haven't apparently recovered from the Labor Day weekend. And, as always, we want to thank our Southwest 66 Credit Union for sponsoring all of our 2023 live streams, including our author live streams this month. Well, as I mentioned, September is National Literacy Month, and this month we are featuring several great authors. Our first guest author is Jeffrey Blount and his book, The Emancipation of Evan Walls. I really enjoyed this book, Jeffrey. We're so happy to have you here today.
Thank you, Alba. It's so nice to be here with you.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, we always want ask our authors to introduce themselves and tell our viewers and followers a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your background.
My name is Jeffrey Blount. I grew up on a farm in Smithfield, Virginia, the southeastern part of the state of Virginia. And I went to Virginia Commonwealth University where I majored in mass communication and stumbled into a control room internship at the local CBS affiliate and followed that path and became a television director. I worked at NBC News for 34 years, where I directed shows like Meet the Press, The Today Show, NBC Nightly News, and other special events. But all along, I continued to dream about writing. I continued to write in other ways. I wrote some op-ed pieces. I have a good friend who creates films for museums, and so I wrote scripts for him. And then when I left the news business, I went into writing fiction full time. And so I am here with you to talk about one of those books.
All right. Well, as you know, Permian Basin Adult Literacy Center, our primary focus is adult literacy. And we were talking about the importance of literacy off the air, but why, can you tell our viewers and followers a little bit about why you think adult literacy in particular is an important topic and an important issue in our society nowadays? It continues to be an important issue.
Oh, absolutely. I think it for adults, literacy, if I can think of it as a kind of activism, is how I think of books. And I know when we think of activism, we think of people marching in the street and the like. And I am pleased that people did that because that's why I'm here talking to you today. But books are, it's a little bit more subtle, but it's still activism. Books can change lives, and books can open up. When you hear people say that it opens up the world to you and opens up your mind, I wish people wouldn't take that for granted. It really does. It really opens your eyes and makes you recognize and see how other people live in the world. We know that novels create empathy in us. In fact, my agent refers to them as little empathy machines. And so we know that adults can read books. They can learn about themselves. They can learn about the world that they're in. They can learn how to navigate the world that they're in, and that includes political situations. It includes any kind of situation where deductive reasoning and understanding the community and the context of your life in which you're in that community, all of that can be found in the ability to read, where we're reading papers or novels or magazines. That's how powerful literacy is.
Absolutely. And I grew up in a small town, and you did as well, especially growing up in a farm. When people say books open up, worlds, I think some people don't understand that, especially if they live in big cities. They're like, but when you grow up in a small town or a small rural area, or you grow up in a farm or ranch, it really does open up so many amazing worlds that, living in a small town or a small area you don't see those from day to day.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And in this book, you can see the main character, Evan. It does live in a small rural area, and books change his life. Really, they do absolutely change his world. um, when did you said you mentioned you started writing after your career in communications and broadcasting?
Mhm.
Did you find it difficult to write, to transition from, like, saying, producing scripts at news stations to writing a whole novel?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say I didn't find it too difficult because I continued to write on my own all along. I had written two little novellas, just to to keep me in it. And writing has always been a part of me. And there have actually been times when I've said, I have to pay attention to other things and leave this writing bug alone. But it keeps knocking on your door and keeps saying, "Hey, I'm here. Acknowledge me."
Uh-huh.
And so I have always continued to write. Um, and I felt like someone asked me if I wished that I had, done the book earlier. But the truth is, I think I had to go through all the stuff that I went through and live the
Mhm.
life that I had lived to be able to give the perspective that I needed in that book, The Emancipation of Evan Walls. So,
Mhm.
um, I went, I did all this, I lived all this stuff, and it put me in the place mentally, emotionally, spiritually to be able to write in the way I wanted to write now. So I've carried it all the way along with me. It's just has gotten to the point where I think that I can put it all together. So it hasn't been that difficult to transition at all.
Yeah. So it's always been something that you were passionate about,
Yes.
and that you always had it in the back of your mind that you had these stories that you
Yeah.
wanted to tell.
Yes.
um, where do you come up with these stories, or what inspires you to write, or how do you develop your characters? I'm always curious
I
about that with authors, because I mean, anybody can be a good writer per se, like, have the grammar and everything all down, but
Right.
do you have a story to tell that will interest people?
Do you have a story to tell? And as one writer said, do you have a truth to tell?
Yes.
And how willing are you to lay that truth on the line in a way that it touches people? So, it's a little bit, I heard someone say it's a little bit like going out into the world naked, because you
Uh-huh.
expose yourself spiritually, you expose yourself emotionally as a writer, um, and you put all this out there on the line so that you can create the characters and create a story that will be of interest to people, that will touch people. And you have to be touched when you're doing that. Robert Frost said
Yes.
that if there are no tears in the writer, there are no tears in the reader. So you have to allow yourself to be vulnerable with yourself in a way that I think your people or many writers are not used to. It's easy to write something technical. It's not
Hmm.
easy to deal with your own dreams and hopes and
Emotions.
sometimes demons and all of
Mhm.
that, and say I'm going to lay this out in my characters for people to read. So I think that that's a part of it. I find I find things in my life. Comedians say they always end up in these situations that are really funny, and then they build upon that.
Mhm.
Mine is the opposite. I have sat in control rooms in many times during my career and seen some very tragic stories. I've seen some happy stories, and many of them say to me, "Oh man, I wish I could write a book about that thing or that thing." So
Mhm.
they come to me that way. Most of the books I write about come to me from things in my life. So there's one, the very first novella called Almost Snow White, which is about a woman passing for white. And then the question is, what if it fails and then you can't come home and you failed and you can't go forward? What happens to you in that situation? Well, that book came from a conversation that I listened to my dad and my grandmother have. And I carried that with me all those years until I sat down to write it. So Evan Walls was something that I lived a little bit. People have asked, and I say like 10% of Evan is me. There was nothing as extreme as what he went through. Um, but having grown up and started to meet people who had had similar experiences that I did, and then started to read about children who were going through similar situations that Evan, made me realize I had to sit down and write this book. It was my mission, it was my duty to write this book, to show the world that these kids who were hiding in plain sight with this unique situation had to be understood. So I find the pieces that I put together to create novels from my life. And one, I was listening to NPR one day, and this author said, I think that, and I just love the idea of this, but she said, I think that there are these ideas floating around us always, and if we are
Mhm.
open to ideas, they just land on your shoulder and say, I belong to you. It's time for you to paint me. It's time for you to sing
Mhm.
me. It's time for you to write me. And so we just have to be open to the world around us, and something will say to you, you need to write my story.
Yes. And also just, from your own experience, lived experiences too. I've always felt, the books that I've read that have an emotional touch from the authors. I feel the emotion more, when I read those books. And,
Oh, yeah,
if a book, after you've read it, you're crying or angry or any kind of emotion, that the author has done their job, and it's really touched
yes,
you. Um,
yes,
so now, can you tell us, without giving too much of it away, can you tell us a
yeah,
little bit about what the Emancipation of Evan Walls is about?
yes. It's about a young boy named Evan Walls who at 10 years old, he is inspired. And
Hmm.
I would say also maybe even a little bit of made afraid by a man on his back porch who is preaching about what black kids. This is 1968, and what we need to do, what the adults needed to do for their black children who are about to go into integrated schools, to support them and make sure they got an education, and how important education was. And he told the story about how he lacked an education, what that meant to him, and how it hurt him.
Mhm.
And so young Evan stood up and said, I'm going to be that. I'm going to be somebody. I'm going to get educated no matter what. But many of the other adults on his porch didn't understand that dream because they had been limited too. And so here you had a brilliant little boy who now sees that education is his way to something more. And he ends up in a situation where the schools integrate, and many white people look at him as an uppity N-word, who, how dare he think he belongs in the classroom with the bright white kids. And when he
Mhm.
does end up in that class, many of the black folks say he's a sellout for going into that space with those white kids. So now you have a young
Like a
child
no-win
who all he
situation.
no-win
Yeah.
situation. All he wants to do is to go to school and to get an education. And he ends up walking between these two very different cultures who are at war with each other. And he is the ultimate victim of their battle. And so it's about Evan trying to continue to have the faith in himself and the strength in himself, which he wouldn't have had if it weren't for some of the characters, Mama Jenny and Eliza Blizzard and the character Bojack, who got him started. He wouldn't have had the strength to do it. But I wanted to show a reality because I know children like Evan Walls. And and it's something that we don't talk about often in the African American community. And one night I was watching the TV show Blackish, and they did a show about colorism. And at the end, they said, we knew it was going to be a difficult subject, but nothing gets fixed in the shadows. And I love
Mhm.
that phrase. And that's why I wrote this book, because I thought it was something that we needed to fix as a community, as in a country, because we all lose when our children lay down their gifts or are not allowed to give their gifts to the world. And so this book is hopefully a piece of work that will open the eyes to a unique situation that our children are suffering, and one that I
Mhm.
believe has significant um,
Rema.
it participates significantly, yeah, in the disparity between education between blacks and whites or kids of color and whites. And I will say that Evan's predicament is not just a Black thing. And when I went on tour, there were people, Hispanic people, other people of other races who will come up to me and say the same. We know we have the same problem.
Yeah,
I'm right.
like I said,
Yeah,
I resonated with it a little bit
yeah,
because it's like you said, like I don't want to give the whole plot away, but it's basically you're torn between two cultures. You know, you have, in my
right,
case, you know, the Mexican Hispanic culture saying, "Oh, you think you're better than us," and then you know you
right,
have another culture saying, you know, who do you think you are? You know, trying to be as
exactly.
educated as we are, and it's like I'm just trying to be, you know, I'm just trying to
My
improve my
best, here's my
life.
best self. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think people don't understand
Think.
the that's a difficult enough maze for an adult to try to navigate.
Hmm.
Imagine being a child and trying to navigate that.
Yes. And why do you think, especially like you said, in the Black culture, in other um, multiracial cultures, that this is the case? Why do you think, you know, being um, you're deemed a snob, or you know, an Oreo, or you know, those other names that you're called, for being just
Yeah.
articulate and smart and educated and well spoken? Why do people hold that against you, do you think, in these communities?
Well, I think it's a legacy of racism, rather it's where and again for people of color in this country. Often when during the pandemic, I was doing a lot of virtual book clubs, and
Mm-hmm.
some of them would be all Black, and we would say to ourselves, "How are we in this situation? Why are we doing this? Why is this happening in our community?"
Mm-hmm.
And I would give my answer, but then one day I was rereading Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon, and she answered that question for me in the words of a one of her characters, and the character's name is Guitar Baines, and Guitar says, "Listen, baby, people do funny things, especially us. The cards are stacked against us, and just trying to stay in the game, stay alive, and in the game makes us do funny things, things we can't help, things that make us hurt one another." And what she was talking about there is systemic racism, and that the legacy of that, if you can imagine, um, you know, let's take a typical Hollywood storyline of a father who's an alcoholic and he abuses his children and his wife in the family. A generation later, you have, let's say there are three kids. You have one child who can't form relationships because of what has happened in the household. Another child
Mm-hmm.
who is a victim of alcoholism also, and another child who is, we think is okay, but in many ways is struggling. So the legacy of racism, the tentacles, still affect us, and we think of them affecting us outwardly. We think of lack of health care, we think of unequal education and all these things, but we never
Mm-hmm.
really turn the mirror on ourselves and see how it's made us internalize things that and make us hurt ourselves and people within our own community. And I think we have to
Mm-hmm.
give that as much attention as we give the things that we fight outwardly against.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we should be building each other up, you know, Black
Building each
communities,
other up.
Hispanic communities, we should be building each other up. And I think it's also, maybe there's a sense of jealousy. Maybe it's like, if I couldn't make it, I'm not going to let you make it, you know.
Right,
um
right.
and
And I also
so
think,
it's like we
like
need
in
to
Evan Walls, I
quit
think
that.
we
Yeah.
need to quit that, and we need to help people. It's a hard thing to do if you don't have neither of my parents had a college education, and
Hmm.
that's something that they always wanted. They never got it, but they wanted to make sure that their sons, I have two older brothers, got an education. So one of the things I recognize is how really hard it is for people to say, I have one life,
Hmm.
and my one life, or whatever situation it is, it seems that this is as far as I'm going. And now I watch these young whippersnappers, you know, and they're getting all these things that I'm living this life that I never led and that I had to fight for them. And I understand that that hurts people to recognize that. And I tried to give space to that in the book, and give voice to that in the book for people to say, you know, I've had one. My life has been more difficult, and you're flying up here and doing all these things and looking down on me, um, and so it's just one of those difficult life situations that there may be no cure for or no answer for, but there's something good and decent in recognizing that people are suffering in this manner, and we have to understand um, that this is you know, a burden that they carry. But at the same
Mhm.
time, we want to educate them that we understand you carry this burden, but there is no
Don't give
reason to
up.
make the next child carry the burden. You know,
Yes.
you
Yes.
if you care about you
Break the
care about
chain.
yourself and your lineage, break the
Yes.
chain. Exactly
Yes.
right.
Yes. Promote your child and hope that they do better than you, you know,
That's exactly
that
right. And so
exceed
that's
you.
why one of the reasons why I'm so proud of my parents.
Yes, absolutely. Um, so what do you hope? And I think you touched on this a little bit, but what do you want the biggest takeaway from the story for your readers to be?
I want people to understand this situation that we spoke about, and the, you know, the idea of the story behind this book.
Hmm.
I want them to support these children. I want them to recognize first and foremost that the issue exists. Many teachers I met on the road in a book tour came up to me and said
Hmm.
they didn't know about it, they didn't understand it, um, but they were better able to talk about it now that they met me. They read the book. Some teachers came up to me and said, "I know it. I see it." I got emails from teachers saying, "I see this,
Hmm.
but I don't know what to say," and especially white
Yeah.
teachers. I don't know how to dip into that
Help
without
out.
causing, you know, troubles. So I had a lot of conversations with teachers about how we do that. So I want people to, one, just understand the problem exists. Two, to understand when we don't allow our kids to dream unencumbered, to live this
Hmm.
life unencumbered, we hurt them, but we also hurt ourselves as communities, because
Yeah.
one day they're going to grow up and do great things, but we've taken that away from them and from ourselves if we don't
Yes.
allow them to do that. So, and the third thing is, I want people to walk away from this book and feel that in the midst of all of this stuff that I'm writing, there is an immense amount of love and support, and I show you
Mm.
how to support these children. I show you how what unconditional love can mean in their lives, and I want
Mhm.
you to walk away understanding that the greatest gift you can give these children, or any child, is unconditional love and support for their dreams.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And so I know you have another book coming up, and unfortunately, it
Yes.
doesn't come out till next year.
So
So we won't
January.
feature it this
Yes.
year. But can you tell us just a little bit about that next novel, Mr. Jimmy from Around the Way?
Yes. Well, Mr. Jimmy continues a little bit of the Evan Walls thing. I mean, there's a piece of literacy here too that's important. But Mr. Jimmy is an African American billionaire, and he is a philanthropist. He is a humanitarian. He is a friend of the president. He's extremely famous. He's on television all the time. He's quoted in the newspapers. He travels the world, and he suffers a
You know
a
you're gonna get
stark.
questions about if this comes from reality. People are gonna be
Oh, yes, yes,
researching.
yes. Yes, yes, yes. Well, there's a lot of research, and I'm certainly happy to have that conversation. And he suffers an incredible fall from grace, um,
Oh boy.
and fractures his life, fractures his family. And he was raised in a rural area, like I was, but he
Mhm.
was raised by a small country preacher, and he had a wonderful childhood. And after what he's done to himself, he decides that he has to go back to his roots, and maybe he can find himself there again. So, but he doesn't go back to Virginia where he grew up. He goes online, buys a house sight unseen in a little town called Ham, Mississippi. When he gets to that
Oh,
house to
no.
try to escape
Those
social
things
media and
never
all this
work
kind of
out well.
stuff,
Sight
he didn't
unseen.
realize, sight unseen, didn't realize that he was adjacent to total abject poverty, the
Oh, boy.
poorest community in the county. He doesn't want to be involved because he's trying to figure out a way to get himself back. But
Uh-huh.
incidents in that community draw him into the community, and he becomes, in many ways, a pillar of that community. And the storyline follows him trying to find some kind of redemption to save his life, but it ends up being that he has to try to help this community save itself.
Wow.
And or they both go down at the same time. And during
Wow.
the process, he meets with childhood illiteracy, and he tries in his way to do something about that as other things. So it's a roadmap to think about how we can empower people who are in these poverty-stricken situations to
Mm-hmm.
to do things, to take what they have and be able to put it on the market and make a living. So it's sort of like the Bible. We don't just give people fish; we teach them how to fish. And
Yes.
so it also, it's an example of who is the village. What's the village look like? What's the responsibility of the village, of us as human beings to each other, and how we don't always have to wait on the government to help us help ourselves. So
Absolutely.
so that's the theory behind Mr. Jimmy, and I'm very proud of it. And I think if you liked
Sounds
Emancipation of Evan
interesting.
Walls, you'll love this one. Yeah.
Well, what I loved about the Emancipation of Evan Walls, and from what it sounds like, Mr. Jimmy from Around the Way, both literacy and books play a huge part in transforming
Abs-
lives in both the books.
absolutely.
And so,
Absolutely.
and so I'm so, as we're an adult literacy organization, so we promote reading, we promote literacy, and we know that literacy and books and reading can transform a person's lives, can transform people's lives. So I greatly appreciate that you've incorporated, literacy and reading and books and
Yeah.
into your books.
Thank you.
So other than the Mr. Jimmy from Around the Way, what other projects are you currently working on?
Well, one of the things I'm doing is following up on the things that the Emancipation of Evan Walls has started. I spoke to the National Association for Gifted Children, and then we had a colloquium at Morgan State University where educators from all around the country came, and we talked about many things, including
Fantastic.
my kids from the Emancipation of Evan Walls. And so I spoke with brightandquirky.com, which is an organization that deals with children like Evan, who are really bright, who other people may see as quirky because they're so bright, but they give them space to be their quirky selves. I've become a part of these groups. I spoke to a group called Reading Partners when this book came out, which was about 5 years ago, and I then joined the board of the National Board of Reading Partners because I felt so passionately about the issue of literacy, childhood literacy, that this
Mhm.
organization is about. And if you are out there and you want to participate and you want to be a reading tutor for children, I suggest you look up Reading Partners. It's a wonderful organization, and these are the kinds of things that I love that books do. I wrote this
Mhm.
book, and now I'm all of a sudden in a position where I'm able to advocate for children because this book has allowed for that. And I've had the opportunity to mentor kids who identified with Evan Walls, the main character, and I look forward and hope that similar things will happen with Mr. Jimmy from Around the Way when it comes out.
And we will share the link to Reading Partners after our live stream as
Thank
well.
you.
So, um, because we love reading at PBALC, we always ask our authors, what are you currently reading, and what are some couple of recommendations for our readers, other than, of course, your books?
Well, I just finished reading A Girl from the Red Rose Motel, which is written by
Okay.
Susan Beckon Zarenda. And it also has to, you know, and it, just by picking it up and just reading it and understanding that we have similar themes, this author and I do. But I think it's a Zurenda. It's a wonderful book. It's just the
Okay.
publication date is actually today. I read it a little bit ahead of time.
Okay.
So I would also recommend a book called High Yellow by
I yellow.
Steve
Okay.
Majors. And it is an incredible, incredible memoir. That's something that I think, you know, people would also like to read. So those are two
All
good
right.
books.
All right. Well, thank you. Well, lastly, if people want to know more about you, where can they find you? What are your socials and websites and everything else? And we'll share them, like I said, in the comments as well.
Okay. Oh, well, I am www.jeffreyblount.com, Jeffrey E. Blount at Jeffrey E. Blount on Instagram, and Jeffrey Blount author on Facebook. I'm
And
toying with the
where's
idea of going on TikTok, but I may be too old for that. I don't know.
and if they want to see you in person, where's your next presentation?
If you go on that website and you go to the events tab, it will show you where I will be in the upcoming months. And certainly when the book comes out in January, I'll be traveling all around the country. And if you are in anywhere near one of those stops, I would love to see you and love to have a conversation with you about Mr. Jimmy from around the way.
Well, Jeffrey, I hope you make it to Texas next year.
Oh, I will. I know that.
Good.
I'll let you know.
Well, I want to thank you again, Jeffrey, for joining us this afternoon for our first author live stream for the in September for National Literacy Month. Make sure and check him out on social media and on his website, and also add the Emancipation of Evan Walls to your list. We have a readathon going on right now, Jeffrey, so this is a good book to add to your readathon
Oh, thank
list.
you. Thank you. Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
yes, you can purchase the Emancipation of Evan Walls now, and it's available on Barnes and Noble, Amazon, you know, anywhere I think you can
Yeah,
purchase books. And
that's correct.
then Mr. Jimmy Around the Way comes out January 16th. So be looking out for that. But I think you can go ahead and pre-order it.
You can
I think.
pre-order now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So make sure and get that one pre-ordered. And also make sure and log in next week to listen to our next author interview. And we will see everyone next week. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Alba.
Bye, everyone.